I found a corner booth at the back of a diner off Route 9, ordered black coffee I wasn't going to drink, and stared at my phone for 20 minutes before I could make myself open his text thread. That's where I was when everything I thought I knew about my marriage started to unravel. Not at home, not in some dramatic confrontation in our living room, in a vinyl booth that smelled like syrup and old grease, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear on my screen while my husband tried to figure out what to say to me. He never did figure it out. My name is Sloan. I was 32 years old, 3 years into what I genuinely believed was a solid marriage, working as a contracts manager at a logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. My husband, I'll call him by what he was to me then, my husband, was a financial analyst. We had a mortgage. We had a rescue dog named Biscuit. We had brunch plans every other Sunday with my mother-in-law, who made the best biscuits I've ever tasted and called me sweetheart like she meant it. I thought we were fine. I actually used that word. Fine. Like, fine is something to aspire to. The first thing I noticed wasn't lipstick on a collar or a mysterious charge on the credit card. It was silence. My husband had always been a talker. He'd narrate his commute, retell meetings word for word, give me full breakdowns of podcast episodes I hadn't asked about. Then one spring, somewhere between February and April, he just quieted down. I told myself it was work stress. He'd been pushing for a promotion. I gave him space. I thought that's what a supportive wife did. What a supportive wife actually did, I would later learn, was pay closer attention. I found out the way a lot of women find out, by accident. A notification that popped up on the shared iPad we used for streaming, a message from a name I didn't recognize. Just a name and a heart emoji. That's all it took to pull the thread. I didn't confront him that night. I know a lot of people would have. But I worked in contracts. I understood the value of documentation before you made your move. I took a screenshot. I went to bed. I lay next to him in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought, very clearly, I need to know everything before I say a single word. It took me 2 weeks. I'm not proud of every method I used, but I'm not ashamed either. By the end of those 2 weeks, I knew her name. She was a colleague from his firm. Someone I'd met at a company Christmas party and thought seemed perfectly pleasant. I knew approximately how long it had been going on, which was closer to 8 months than I could stomach. And I knew something else, something I hadn't gone looking for but couldn't unsee once I found it. There was a man who'd been leaving comments on her public Instagram. Nothing scandalous, just the kind of comments a husband leaves. Inside jokes. A photo tag here and there. She'd stopped responding to him around the same time the heart emoji had appeared on my iPad. That man's name was Gil. I filed for divorce without telling my husband first. I called my older sister, who'd gone through her own divorce 4 years earlier and had kept every contact she'd ever collected in the process. She got me a good attorney. I signed a retainer on a Thursday and served my husband papers the following Monday. The look on his face when he opened that envelope, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something close to satisfaction. Not joy. Something colder and more specific than joy. He cried. He tried to explain. He used every word in the handbook. It didn't mean anything. I was confused. She'd been going through a hard time. He hadn't meant for it to happen. I sat across from him at our kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface, and I let him talk until he ran out of words. Then I said, "The dog stays with me," and I walked out of the room. What happened next I genuinely did not anticipate. 3 days after I served the papers, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up on the last ring because I was waiting to hear back from my attorney. The man on the other end introduced himself as Gil. He said he'd found my contact information through a mutual connection, a detail I later verified and found credible. He said he'd been served divorce papers himself and had since been doing his own research. He'd learned about my husband, he said, and I remember this precisely, I think we're in the same situation, and I think we might be able to help each other. I was quiet for a long moment. What kind of help? I said. He said he'd rather speak in person. He suggested coffee somewhere public. He said he understood if I thought this was strange. It was strange, but I said yes. We met at a Panera about halfway between our two zip codes. Neutral ground, busy enough to feel safe. I got there 10 minutes early and positioned myself so I could see the door. When he walked in, I recognized him from the Instagram photos, mid-40s, dark coat, the kind of careful posture that comes from years of client-facing work. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He shook my hand. He thanked me for coming. He bought his own coffee and sat down without making any of it awkward, which I appreciated. He was an independent CPA with his own practice. 3 employees, mostly small business clients, built over 15 years. He was specific about that. Not flashy, not trying to impress me. He laid it out like a fact. My wife, he said, has been involved in financial misconduct at her firm. I didn't know the extent of it until I started going through records after I found out about the affair. I've been sitting on information I don't know what to do with. I looked at him. What kind of misconduct? He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were printed bank statements, a series of wire transfer records, and a 1-page summary he'd clearly written himself. His handwriting was small and precise, the kind that comes from years of working with numbers. I looked at the summary. Then I looked up at him. She's been redirecting client funds, I said. Redirecting is a polite word for it, he said. The amounts weren't reckless. That was the thing that made it worse somehow. It wasn't someone grabbing a handful of cash and running. It was careful, methodical, small enough increments to avoid automated flags. His wife worked in financial advising. She had access to accounts that trusted her completely. And my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, had been acting as the receiving account. The wire transfers had a pattern that lined up with deposits I'd seen on our joint account that I'd assumed were his performance bonuses. I sat with that information for a very long time. How much? I finally asked. Gil told me. It was not a small number. I thought about the vacation we'd taken to Scottsdale the previous fall. I thought about the new truck he bought in January, which I thought was an impulsive purchase he justified with overtime. I thought about a lot of things very quickly. Have you gone to the authorities? I asked. Not yet, he said. My attorney advised me to approach you first, because your name is still on the joint account where some of these transfers landed, which means technically you're a potential person of interest until it's established you had no knowledge. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I didn't remember drinking any of it. What do you need from me? I said. A statement, he said. Dated, notarized, confirming you had no knowledge, and anything you have. Documents, access records, anything from the joint account history that supports the timeline. I nodded slowly. And what do I get out of this? He held my gaze. You get your name cleared before the investigation becomes official. And, he paused, you get to be the person who helped, not the person who was caught in the middle. I called my attorney that evening. She was quiet while I explained, asked 3 very sharp questions, and then told me I'd done exactly the right thing by not giving Gil anything yet and coming to her first. We met in her office the next morning. Her name was Constance, late 50s, gray bob, the kind of person who made you feel like whatever mess you'd walked in with, she'd seen worse and handled it. She reviewed the folder Gil had given me, cross-referenced it with the account records I'd already pulled for the divorce proceedings, and within about 40 minutes had a picture that was unfortunately very clear. Your husband, she said, setting down her reading glasses, has been receiving fraudulently redirected client funds for at least 14 months. 14 months. 2 months before he'd gone quiet on me. I thought about that for a second. The silence, the distance, the strange, careful way he'd started treating me, like I was something that might break or something that might notice. I understood it now. The guilt hadn't made him pull away because he was in love with someone else. Or not only that, the guilt had made him pull away because he was afraid of what I might see. Constance contacted the relevant parties, Gil's attorney, and through him, a financial crimes investigator at the state level who had already been looking at the farm for unrelated reasons. My cooperation, she made clear, was voluntary and proactive. I was not a target. I had receipts and a timeline that proved it. It still wasn't easy. There's nothing easy about sitting across a table from a federal investigator and talking about your husband's bank deposits while a court reporter types every word you say. There's nothing easy about having to describe what your life looked like from the inside while someone else was quietly dismantling it from underneath. But I did it. I answered every question. I handed over everything I had. My husband was arrested on a Tuesday morning in May. I know because my sister called me, her voice careful, checking to see how I was. I wasn't in the parking lot of a Kroger. I had a cart full of groceries. I stood next to my car in the spring sunshine, and I felt, honestly, I don't have a perfect word for what I felt. Not happy. Not relieved, exactly. Something like the sensation you get when you've been holding your breath for so long you've forgotten that's what you were doing, and then you finally let it out. Your whole chest opens up. The air is sharp and real. "Are you okay?" my sister asked. "I think I am," I said. "I think I actually am." His attorney entered a negotiated plea 5 weeks later. He cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, which is how it usually goes, from what Constance told me. His wife, who had been the architect of the scheme, faced the heavier charge. My name was never mentioned in the public documents. Constance had made sure of that. The divorce was finalized 8 weeks after the arrest. I got the house, or rather, I kept the mortgage, which under the circumstances felt like a reasonable consolation prize. I got Biscuit. I got the kitchen table I'd bought with my own money 3 years ago, the one I'd sat across from him at when he tried to explain himself. I put that table in storage and bought a new one. I want to tell you about Gil, because I know that's the part you're waiting for, and I want to be honest about how it actually went, rather than how a clean story would have it go. We stayed in contact through the legal process because we had to. Attorney emails, shared document requests, a few phone calls coordinating timelines. We were professional. We were both in the middle of divorces and federal cooperation agreements, and neither of us had the bandwidth to be anything else. After my divorce was finalized, he reached out and asked if I wanted to have dinner. Not Panera this time, an actual restaurant. I said yes. We talked for 3 hours. About the obvious things first. The legal processes, what it felt like when it was over, the strange particular loneliness of being the person who'd been lied to. And then about other things. He coached his daughter's soccer team for 6 years. He had strong opinions about regional barbecue. He'd read the same obscure biography about Ulysses Grant that I'd read 2 years ago, and we spent 20 minutes disagreeing about a specific chapter. He walked me to my car. He said he'd had a really good time. I told him I had too, which was more true than I'd expected. We took it slow. There is no other way to take something when you've both just come through what we'd come through. We were not naive people. We did not confuse gratitude for love or proximity for connection. We asked real questions of each other, and we waited for real answers. What I can tell you, from where I'm standing now, he is the most straightforward person I've ever been in a relationship with. Not uncomplicated. He has a daughter from his marriage. We have schedules to coordinate. There are hard conversations we've had and will have again. But straightforward. He says what he thinks. He does what he says he's going to do. After years of reading silence as fine and trusting absence as loyalty, straightforward felt like a revelation. My mother-in-law, My former mother-in-law texted me 3 months after the arrest, just to say she was sorry, that she'd had no idea, that she loved me and hoped I was doing well. I believed her on all 3 counts. I wrote back and told her she could still come watch Biscuit when I traveled for work. She took me up on it. Some things you don't lose just because a marriage ends. The ones worth keeping have a way of finding their own footing. I'm not going to tell you I'm glad it happened. That's not how I feel. What I lost, the version of my life I thought I was living, the person I thought I was building something with, that was a real loss, and I'm not interested in retrofitting it into a blessing. What I will tell you is that the woman who sat in that diner booth staring at her phone, too afraid to open the text thread, would not recognize the woman writing this, not because she became someone tougher or someone who doesn't trust anymore. The opposite, she became someone who knows the difference between what she thought she wanted and what she actually needs. Someone who can sit across a table from a hard conversation and stay in her seat. That's not nothing. In fact, where I'm standing right now, with Biscuit asleep at my feet and a dinner reservation for Friday and a mortgage I can cover on my own paycheck, that's not nothing at all. I keep coming back to the 2 weeks I spent gathering evidence before I said a single word to my husband. A lot of people, when I tell that part of the story, say they could never have done that, slept next to someone, made coffee in the same kitchen, passed them in the hallway, while knowing what they knew. And I understand why they say that, but I think what those 2 weeks actually were, more than anything else, was the moment I chose to act from clarity, instead of reaction. That choice made every difference in what came after. Because here's what I've noticed about the way things unravel and the way they come back together. It rarely happens the way you expect, but it almost never happens randomly. My husband made choices. His partner in this made choices. Those choices had weight, and eventually that weight landed somewhere on investigators' desks, in court documents, in the careful handwriting of a man named Gil sitting across a Panera table with a manila folder he didn't have to share with me. And I made choices too. I could have confronted my husband the night I saw that notification and blown the whole thing open in a way that felt satisfying for about 45 seconds and then left me legally exposed and emotionally wrecked. I didn't. I could have ignored Gil's call, assumed it was some kind of trap, stayed small and safe, and let whatever was coming come without my participation. I didn't do that either. I showed up. I paid attention. I trusted Constance, and I trusted the process, and I stayed honest even when honest was inconvenient and exhausting. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting through something hard. It's not one dramatic moment of courage. It's about 50 small decisions made in unglamorous circumstances, in parking lots, in attorneys' offices, in depositions where you're trying very hard not to cry. Integrity, real integrity, is just the accumulation of those small decisions over time. My husband's wasn't intact when it mattered, and that fact wrote the rest of his story. Mine was, and that fact wrote mine. I've also thought a lot about what it takes to actually see a situation clearly when you're inside it, when your emotions are screaming at you and the stakes are high and the person across from you is counting on your confusion to protect them. That kind of clear-headedness isn't coldness. It's not shutting down. It's the hardest kind of thinking there is. Disciplined, patient, honest even about the parts of the picture you wish weren't there. I'm proud of that version of myself. The one who looked at those bank records and didn't flinch, who asked the right questions and waited for real answers. And then there's the part I couldn't have planned or forced, just showing up for what came next, taking the call from a stranger, driving to a Panera at a zip code halfway between 2 broken lives, sitting down across from someone who turned out to be, against all probability, a person worth knowing. Sloane, the woman who sat in that diner booth with cold coffee and a phone she was afraid to look at, she did okay. More than okay. She stayed in her seat when it was hard, and she walked out the door when she was ready. And those two things together turned out to be enough.